implementation of durable solutions. Just before starting, I would like to have some housekeeping comments. Please, I will ask all panelists to have their videos on when speaking, but all others to have their videos off and on mute. To everyone who's attending today, almost 200 already, I would like to ask you that you can ask us your questions through the question functions, and we will try towards the end to respond to all of this. So if you want to indicate who you are and who the question is addressed to, you can do so, and we will take the questions towards the end of each panel. In the meantime, for more technical questions, a team will be present and on standby to answer your questions in writing if they are not addressed directly to the speakers. There is an interpretation to the panel, Arabic, English, and English, Arabic. It's available, so you can click on the interpretation function on Zoom so that you can access it, and then you can mute the original audio so that you can access the interpretation without hearing us. Finally, we will be live on YouTube through the NRC channel. This is a live streamed event so that Syrian refugees can listen and interact via the YouTube comments, which is done now as we are rolling. So I would like to ask again everyone from the speakers to please turn off your cameras unless you are speaking. Thank you very much. Rasha, I'm going to start with you. Rasha is the youth ambassador from Save the Children, and I will start today. I'm very happy to have you amongst us, and I'm very happy to start with you sharing some of your personal experiences. Rasha, you were born in Damascus, Syria, and you fled together with your family to the Netherlands at the age of 11. Today, you are 18. Can you tell us why did you leave Syria?
Hi, I'm Rasha. Yeah, so about 8 years ago, when the Syrian revolution was 2 years in, our family was facing issues due to my parents' political activism, and we basically became targeted, and we had to leave ASAP because it was just getting too unsafe for us, and we were being followed, etc. So we just couldn't stay anymore.
This is very sad to hear, Rasha. Now you are 18. I heard that you just participated in the recent elections. You voted in the country where you are now living. When did you arrive to the Netherlands? And when you arrived, what helped you and your families to settle in a new society? What were the things that made you feel at home and allowed you to become an active citizen in this country?
So we arrived in the Netherlands on November 17th, I think, 2013. I remember the date exactly just because it was just such an impactful day for us as a family. I think what helped the most was, first of all, the people around us. We were surrounded by pretty good people, and so they helped us feel at home. Next to that, social help was really important. I was going to therapy, my sister, my brother, everyone in the family was. We even had family therapy together. So all of it together kind of helped us settle in and understand how we can try and fix, or more like make peace with our trauma, because that will still follow you your whole life through, but you just have to know how to make peace with that.
Rasha, how does it feel to be able to vote? What was your feeling?
It was a really cool feeling for me, but for my mom, I think it was more impactful because for her, it felt like she was it was the first time she could vote in her life. I mean, I was turning 18. I pretty much consider myself Dutch at this point, so it was more natural for me to just go vote because my friends were voting. But for my mom, it was more like, I mean, she could have voted in Syria, but she could only vote on one person, and that felt useless, so she never did. And for her to be able to vote on someone out of 40 something parties just felt very liberating.
Thank you so much, Rasha. We look forward to hearing from you again towards the end of today. I would like to start today with saying that we will have two panels and a small conversation towards the end. The first panel is on the impact of prolonged displacement. So we will be exploring together what is the situation now in neighboring countries after 10 years of protracted displacement, what are some of the push factors, and looking a little bit at what are some of the durable solutions in this displacement. In the first panel, we will have with us Ms. Brigitta Tazelaar, who's the Deputy Director General for International Cooperation in the Netherlands. We will have Mr. George Haddad, Director of ALIF, Act for Human Rights, and part of the Refugee Protection Watch, as well as Inger Ashing, which is the Chief Executive Officer for Save the Children. And I apologize if I mispronounced any of your names. We will start by having the Netherlands speech. So you have 2 minutes. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Such a classic mistake. Sorry about that. Thank you, Ruba, for giving me the floor, and you pronounced my name perfectly, so thank you for that. But before anything, I would like to thank Rasha, because Rasha, you met also the Minister Kaag prior to the 4th Brussels conference last year, when you shared a petition on psychosocial safety for Syrian children. Well, unfortunately, mental health needs are only growing, and there's still a taboo on talking about mental health. But you, however, you work courageously to break those taboos. Mabruk, as they say in Arabic. And courage is much needed for Syria 10 years on. 10 years of revolution, of bombings, loss, displacement, resistance. And here we are at yet another Brussels conference, the 5th in its form, to express our support to Syrians. And since then, the situation for Syrian displaced people has only worsened, also due to the devastating impact of COVID-19. Poverty is rising, food security is pervasive. Humanitarian aid does not reach those most in need. And if the cross-border resolution is not renewed, the already limited humanitarian access will deteriorate. And the humanitarian situation will continue to drive displacement. Meanwhile, the situation in Lebanon is escalating and needs are growing while financial support is not growing equally. So perhaps needless to say, this sum up makes me deeply worried about the impact of these 10 years, especially on the minds, hearts, and souls of Syrians. How resilient can one be? Today, we will be talking specifically about durable solutions for Syrian refugees and internally displaced people. More than half of the Syrian population is displaced. And let me begin by saying that the main way to achieve sustainable solutions is through a political solution to the conflict, in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. It's very disappointing, no progress is being made. And we call upon all parties involved and those who have leverage over them to be courageous and to use their leverage for a durable solution to the conflict. Currently, however, we know the situation in Syria does not allow for safe and dignified return. Only around 3% has returned thus far. Resettlement opportunities are scarce, with only 4% of Syrians in need being resettled. And integration in host countries remains a challenge. Thus, after 10 years, we need to admit that durable solutions remain out of sight for many. And as a result, Syrian displaced people find themselves between a rock and a hard place. This situation of infinite temporariness is unsustainable and poses a risk for Syrians, host countries, and all of us. Well, the Netherlands is and remains committed to ensuring durable solutions for Syrian displaced people. Annually, we resettle Syrian refugees and support their integration in the Netherlands. Also, as one of the largest donors to host countries in the region, we contribute to improving access to protection, education, and employment for refugees, as well as vulnerable host communities. In the way forward, we must maximize the sustainability of our impact through strengthening national systems and local partners. To that end, we have recently invested in social security systems in Jordan to increase currently uncovered workers, including refugees. We remain committed to a holistic and development approach to forced displacement in the region. We, donors and host countries, have the continued responsibility to pursue all possible durable solutions for refugees in Syria, the region, or Europe. Our commitment cannot fade. In line with our commitments in the Global Compact on Refugees, we call on fellow donors to sustain and, where possible, increase support to durable solutions. Just like Russia, we need to be courageous, and we look forward to exploring opportunities with all of you today. Thank you very much, Ruba.
Thank you so much, Brigitta, for your important contribution. We will come back to you also in the question and answer section. Let me welcome again George from Elif. George, if you can open your camera, that's wonderful. Hi, George. My question to you today, I am live with you now from Lebanon, and I know how dire the situation is on Lebanese citizens, not to mention Syrian citizens and national who have been here for 10 years. How is the situation today for Syrian refugees in Lebanon? What are some of the challenges that have come up with this prolonged displacement? And what are the challenges to implementing some durable solutions in neighboring countries such as Lebanon?
Okay, so first, hello everyone. I realized this morning that we shouldn't be so happy to be here. We would have hoped to not reach the 10 years milestone regarding this conflict. Sadly, despite 10 years of civil war and crisis, what we're going to discuss has already been said thousands of times over the past decade. As you know, Lebanon is going through a series of crises that is having a very dire impact on both the host and the refugee communities, whether Palestinian or Syrians. As we said, protection issues have been exacerbated over the years and are hitting a critical level due to Lebanon's financial collapse, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the dangerous increase of polarization. Legal documentation are still very challenging to acquire, while threats and violence are on the rise. I'm just going to give a couple of numbers from a research of RPW, our most recent research from February 2021, which is based on a conversation with more than 400 individuals, Lebanese and Syrian, which shows that almost 85% of the Lebanese and 80% of Syrians didn't have an income that could cover the cost of living anymore. So in order to push for more inclusion of the Syrian refugees in this kind of discussion, over the weekend, we asked 200 of our Syrian panel who wanted to be involved during this event, if a couple of questions. One of them, if they were having more difficulties reaching their basic needs. In the past 3 months, the needs have increased in terms of food security from 68 to 76%, while 66% could not afford rent anymore, and 40% had no access whatsoever to healthcare. This situation is reflected whether with Lebanese, Palestinians, and Syrian refugees all over the country. So, as usual, there are still a lot of pressure to return, with 75% of our respondents reporting pressure to go back to Syria. Sadly, Syria is still going through a series of conflicts, insecurity, and civil unrest, while many do not have guarantees of protection upon return. At the moment, it is very hard for the vast majority of refugees to make a sane decision regarding their return to the country. We also asked our interviewees regarding the subject of return if they were planning to go back within the next 6 months. According to our data, 42% are planning to stay for now in the country, while 50% want to leave Lebanon completely, leaving only 2% of people thinking of returning to Syria. So in addition, I'm just going to add some tangible information from the ground, which is a bit the reality from what we're seeing. Social tensions have been on the rise, with several cases of collective punishment being documented throughout the country. Following certain incidents in the north, in Ba'a, and in other regions as well, hundreds of Syrian refugees' families have been evicted following a certain event, usually a violent event. The problem is not to blame local communities or random citizens, but the Lebanese authorities, who are failing to protect both the Lebanese host community and the Syrian refugees from violence, tensions, and conflicts. They're not able to uphold the rule of law, to conduct transparent investigations, and hold duty bearers and the people who are behind these incidents accountable and give justice to the victims. So tensions are increasing, especially also around the COVID-19 treatment or access to the vaccines. We saw a lot of groups, a lot of parties trying to exclude refugees from getting the vaccines before the Lebanese people. which will completely defeat the purpose of a vast vaccination program in the country. So this is why it is important to discuss the question of durable solutions, especially peaceful long-term solutions, and the realistic and be realistic in what is expected about what can be achieved. And this is why pushing for a clear resettlement strategy is also crucial at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We will come back to the issue of resettlement later on in our conversation in this panel. Let me now move to Inger Ashing, the Chief Executive Officer of Save the Children. And I would like to ask you, given the protracted nature of the Syrian displacement and the Syrian refugee crisis, and with no possible end in sight, how can we create and develop an environment more protective of children's rights and needs in displacement?
Thank you so much, Ruba. So as we all know, more than 10 years of conflict in Syria has had a devastating impact on the country's children. And we know as Save the Children because we are there and we've been there. And children have told us repeatedly of the ongoing challenges that they are facing, including threats to their lives, losing loved ones, missing out on education, and having to leave their homes multiple times to flee violence. And as we all know, this is also creating the largest wave of displacement in modern history and in the world today. And we have millions of children now finding themselves stuck in limbo, faced with a prospect of further displacement or unsafe return. Save the Children, we have spoken to almost 2,000 Syrian children about the experience of displacement within Syria, in the neighboring countries and in Europe. And three main focus topics emerge as a focus on things we need to do to address psychosocial safety. And these are access to meaningful future opportunities, a sense of connectiveness, and agency in decision-making, meaning that the children themselves need to have their voices heard in any decisions that concern them. We have listened to children, to their priorities. And we have done so because we are not only investing in their well-being now, but we also need to invest in their future. And right now, what children are telling us is that they don't want to be sent back because they are afraid, because they don't see a future for themselves, and they do not feel accepted or heard. When we ask Syrian children what makes them feel safe, as I said, access to meaningful future opportunities rank highest. And a 15-year-old Jasmine, she told us, I prefer to travel to have a better future. We want to go to a place where I have all the means and opportunities to learn. And having hope for the future means an ability to study, as well as being able to live in a stable context without fear of losing one's home or facing safety threats. All those have significant impact on children's overall sense of well-being. And wherever they are, in Syria or in neighboring countries or in Europe, the Syrian children have made it clear that what they want is to connect to the people around them. And you heard Rasha in the introduction talking about how she felt welcome and how she felt at home when she and her family came to the Netherlands. And that is what all children around, all the Syrian children, wherever they are, want, and that's what they want to feel. And sadly, what we hear children saying, particularly the children displaced inside of Syria, they show the lowest sense of connection with their communities. And they were significantly more likely to report having experienced discrimination than their peers in Jordan and Lebanon, for example, which could be an indication of torn social fabric inside the country. And we also heard George talking about the social tension in many of the countries where we have Syrian children living. And of course, that is a real threat to the social well-being for the children. And I want to share what the Syrian Adolescent Committee told us. We hope that Syrian children achieve their rights and secure a good future. We hope that those who wish to emigrate can do so to build a better and safer life. Those that wish to return to Syria need an end to the war. They need safe spaces to return, and they need to be able to continue their education. Children are the future of Syria, and ensuring that they have access to future opportunities, feel connected to their communities, and are able to influence their lives is critical to their future integration and for achieving a durable solution to the whole crisis. And children in Syria have spent most of their upbringing in conflict or displacement. This 10-year conflict has cost them their childhoods, but the world should not be allowed to rob them of their future. Thank you.
Thank you, Inger. I'm going to stay with you and ask you a follow-up question, but I would just like to remind everyone that you can ask questions to the panelists through our Q&A section, which is found at the bottom of this Zoom application. I would like to ask you, Inger, what is concretely needed then to be done today for the kids to be feeling more safe, for them to access more durable solutions that guarantee their protection? I mean, you've spoken how fearful they were. What are some of the concrete steps that can be done to ensure that today in Syria and the region?
One really critical thing that we need to focus on is, of course, access to education, because education is one of the key things that children themselves ask for. They want an end to the war and they want access to education. And we have in Syria and in neighboring countries, we have large groups of children being out of education, and even worse so because of the COVID situation. So that is one thing. Another thing is to make sure that we address the discrimination and harassment that Syrian children experience. And we need to make sure that we have policies in place, programs in place, particularly within education to address discrimination. And I also think it's critical to think about how we more broadly discuss Syrian children and Syrian families and talk about them as being part of their communities, because this feeling of not belonging, not being part of the communities that they live in, is really a threat to the well-being of many Syrian children. And to be a bit concrete, it is critical to have space, a mechanism for dialogue, cooperation and exchange between refugees and host communities, because that is one of the real ways where you can bridge the gap that many of the children currently face.
Thank you so much. I would like to go back to George and ask, after hearing our renowned speakers talk about the experiences of children going to their countries, do you think there are some concrete steps we can do today to ensure medium to long-term integration of Syrian refugees in Lebanon? And what do you think about the resettlement programs at the moment from Lebanon? Is there any steps towards reactivating them?
I'm sorry, can I keep my camera off? I'm having very bad connection problems.
Don't worry about it.
No, the problem is that when we talk about durable solutions, we really need to take into account that it should be a peaceful, durable solution. At the moment, we know that the situation in Syria is nightmarish, chaotic, and it's almost impossible for people to return. So this one is off the book as well. About integration in Lebanon, we need to really be aware that the situation is getting worse day by day, and forced evictions, deportations, violence against refugees, and even between Lebanese themselves are on the rise dangerously. We can see that every week. We just need to open a new Twitter account. You can check what the videos circulating online. So what needs to be done in Lebanon is at least have the Lebanese authorities try to work on policies and the barriers they have been putting against refugees in terms of legal documentation, for example. Instead of renewing every year, they could be renewed every 2 years. Try to ease a bit the tension, the pressure on the Syrian refugees during their stay, which is temporary, of course, but they should have the full protection and full guarantees by the Lebanese authorities. Will have to implement mechanisms on the ground to protect both the Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees, and the Lebanese people. At the moment, this is not happening. For example, the UNHCR has not the right, doesn't have the right to resume registration since 2015, which is creating a lot of pressure on refugees who are not able to access certain humanitarian care, human rights, and are always at risk to be deported or arrested because they simply don't have the documents. So this should be cleared from the start. The Lebanese authorities need to start working on this. It's been 6 years. Regarding resettlements, I think what's happening is very slow. We've seen a decrease in terms of numbers of resettlements for the past few yeast. The places are very limited. And there's also a need for the international community to really realize that what is happening and what we've been seeing the past few months is literally affecting durable solutions. We're seeing breach to non-refoulement. We're seeing deportations. So this is really setting a bad example. How countries in the region will react. They're just going to say that other countries are doing the same, we're just going to do the same as well. So it needs to be a responsibility sharing between all these countries and these organizations to finally address this question.
Thank you, George. So following on that, Brigitta, we heard from our two speakers about these durable solutions that are needed to get the protection of refugees. What do you think can the international community do to enhance the support for these durable solutions from your perspective?
Well, in the end, Ruba, I think it all begins and starts with a political solution. If there's not going to be any political solution, the future looks very grim. I have a little bit of hope because of the new U.S. administration and the fact that people who are back in power in the U.S. administration, they have dealt with Syria and Iran before. They know what worked and what didn't work, and I think there's a level of commitment on their side that should give us a bit of hope. But of course we have to be realistic as well. And while there is not a political solution, we have to do everything in our power to ensure that refugees are safe. And that they can continue with their lives in dignity in such a way that people, the host communities are also not infringed on their freedoms and ability to work, etc. And we as an international community have to take our responsibility. We're doing so as the Netherlands. We have big, huge programs when it comes to assisting countries like Jordan and Lebanon and Iraq and others in Africa in ensuring that refugees are supported with not only food but also with a perspective, that they have a perspective for work, a perspective for education for their children. We will not let them down, and nor should anyone else let them down in the international community.
What about resettlement? I mean, a lot of countries are happy to fund neighboring countries, but what about, I mean, you mentioned a very, very low number on resettlement. What can the international community do to ensure that there is a responsibility sharing when it comes to resettlement?
Yeah, I mean, look, even depending on the outcome of because we just had elections on the new government, maybe you will see a little increase or not, but in the end, that's not going to do the trick. Whether we take 500 or 1,000 or 5,000, of course, it's nice for those people, but the sheer numbers that we're talking about is that's still nothing compared to the needs. So, with resettlement, we're not going to solve the problem. The problem needs to be found in Syria itself with a political solution.
Thank you. I received a question on the chat, which says, to support durable solutions, it's essential to ensure all children, youth, and families have access to quality MHPSS services, so mental health and psychosocial support services relevant to their needs, culture, and particular experiences at all stages of displacement. Inger, how can we do to ensure that children receive this kind of support in neighboring countries and even inside Syria throughout this difficult and prolonged conflict?
Thank you for that question. I think just to add to what was just said, I think that, of course, what is needed is a political solution to stop the war and stop the war on children. But in the current situation, there is a real need to make sure that children have access to basic service education and support when it comes to their mental health. It is critical that the hosting countries and the donor community are focusing on this. I think that for the first years of this conflict, the humanitarian assistance has been focused on life-saving interventions, but we have to make sure that we are linking this to durable solutions and resilience, and that part of that is a strong focus on supporting children and their families with the mental health, which is, as we've heard before, an increasing need for. So there should be a strong focus on this when when we discuss what programs and policies we need in place, when we discuss what we fund in the donor community, because it is critical that all children have access to that. Because as you heard Rasha tell us in the beginning of this whole discussion, this is what helped her and her family to make peace with the situation, the trauma that they have been going through, and all children and all their families need that. So it's making sure that we have organizations on the ground that can do this and that they get the proper support, making sure that the authorities in the hosting governments focus on this with the support of the donors and the governments that are part of the bigger donors as well. But I think it's also critical to make sure that we are very intentional about mainstreaming mental health and psychosocial support considerations in the provision of education, healthcare, and social services throughout, as was said in the chat, making sure that we have taken into account the culturally sensitive services for children and their families. And this should be throughout the process, during the asylum, settlement, etc. So this is critical.
Thank you. We have a question actually from the refugees from Lebanon, Syrian refugees who are watching us via YouTube. I want to say hello to everyone from the refugee communities watching us. And they are asking, what are the solutions that are provided by the international community to empower Syrian refugees in Lebanon? And may I ask, is the international community doing enough to empower Syrian refugees in Lebanon, George?
Hello again. So I think, I mean, there are a lot of different programs and projects, of course, but what needs to be done is put more resources and efforts to push for the inclusion of Syrian CSOs and networks within all these discussions and events. I think what's happening and what has been happening for the past few years is that we are almost creating an echo chamber where we have the same people, the same organizations, and the same representatives talking to each other by excluding the voice of the people concerned directly. So we need to put more resources available for Syrian, for example, research efforts who document protection concerns in areas of return, which in the end will also push for the empowerment of Syrians in Lebanon to take the decisions they need in terms of coping mechanism or to returning to Syria. It's about having literally the knowledge and expertise of Syrians who operate in Syria to be better incorporated into policy discussions and to help increase information available to Syrians who are thinking of returning. But that could be a first step. And also, of course, include Syrian organizations within the Brussels conference framework and other, of course, events within, during, and after the conferences. It can be at the structural level, in discussions, in dialogue, and other kind of actions, of course.
Thank you, George. Maybe a final question that we received in the chat to Brigitte. It says, how can we ensure as the international community that COVID-19 does not have a double or even triple adverse effect on displaced Syrians? First, on their health and well-being in host countries, when they're facing discriminatory measures against them and are treated as second-ranking citizens, also when it comes to receiving the vaccination. And then secondly, by a decrease and delay in resettlement to safe and stable third countries. So what do you think the effect of COVID has been, and how can we mitigate that, is the question from Noor Lekker.
Look, what we need, I think it's a very relevant question. And personally, this is really from a personal perspective, I'm not so proud of what's happening in the world today. We need, obviously, a much higher degree of solidarity. It is not right that people in the West are going to be vaccinated during this year, and that some people in the rest of the world will need to wait until 2023 even. And not only is it not right to be in such a position, it's also not smart, because we know that we will have mutations developing if the weak people in other countries are not going to be vaccinated. So from this ministry, be sure that we're pushing for more solidarity when it comes to vaccine distribution, and that we are putting the money where our mouth is as well, because we are giving extra money to the COVAX facility for exactly that purpose. But we're far, and this needs a lot of lobby internationally, not only by ministries of development cooperation like ours, but also by countries from the South, civil society. You all need to raise your voice and demand a more just and equal distribution of vaccines.
Another question to you also that came on the chat is what commitments can be made towards funding the research, development and testing of innovative solutions led by youth and families with lived experiences to best support local integration, for example, in schools, in resettlements, and even in returns?
That's a little bit of a difficult question for me, because we have different people dealing with development cooperation packages. I know that in the countries that receive a lot of refugees, Syrian refugees, we have a quite a unique program which is called Prospects, and we are ensuring that international organizations are forced, more or less, in a kind way, to work together instead of working in their silos, so that we can look upon the situation and people from an integrated point of view, which means that we're supporting World Bank, UNICEF, ILO, IFC, and UNHCR in working together in finding ways on how to give more integrated perspective to people in need, and they are then being put in a position to actually learn from the experiences that the person who just asked that question and integrate that into their programming at the local level. So I think it's really important that these experiences are there. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm quite sure that they will have to find their way to these organizations that we're funding so that they can make use of that.
Thank you very, very much. And I would like to thank our three speakers for very interesting remarks and responses. I wish we had more time to explore your ideas even further. But now I would like to move to our second panel discussion, which is about ensuring an ambitious and forward-looking durable solution agenda to the Syria crisis. We will be looking at the situation inside Syria, and we will be highlighting some of the recommendations that we need to achieve in order to have more success in durable solutions. In this panel, I'll have with me, and again, excuse my pronunciations, I'll have with me Mr. Johannes Olgelund, Director General for International Development Cooperation from Sweden. We'll have Mrs. Huda Atassi, Regional Director of the International Humanitarian Relief, as well as part of the Voices for Displaced Syrians Forum, which Sawa for Development and Aid, the organization I had, we are also part of this forum. And Gillian Triggs, who is the Assistant Secretary General, Assistant High Commissioner for Protection at UNHCR. And last but definitely not least, Mr. Jan Egeland, who's the Secretary General at the Norwegian Refugee Council. I would like to start by Mr. Johannes. You have the floor to do your introductory remarks. Please, Brigitte, you can mute your mic, and Mr. Johannes, if you can open your camera and give your introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There I am now. When I turn my camera off, I see I'm only half in the picture, but now I think I'm on there. So thank you very much. Thanks for the first panel. I thought it was very interesting. Indeed, and I think I might touch on some of the same things. They go into each other. Again, pronunciation of my name is excellent, especially my first name. So please go by that. Picking up from the first panel, I want to start by just a recognition that I think that it's important for us to do, to recognize that, to acknowledge that what we are trying to do, what we are doing in our development cooperation is insufficient. I think that the international community is doing a lot. I'll say a few words on what we're doing from the Swedish side, but it's an effort to do that, of course, but it is insufficient, and we are aware of that, and we need to push ourselves and together to try and do more and do it more efficiently. And that's why this panel and this discussion that we're having now and the conference is so important. but I think it should be recognized. The other obvious starting point is, of course, that a political solution is what is needed. Of course, I think everyone has said this, but I think it cannot be stated enough, because we are trying to, fundamentally we are trying to put a band-aid on a bleeding wound, and we should continue trying that, but we need to address the core issues here as well. So Sweden has for a long time been one of the larger donors to the Syria crisis, and we make a point out of having a strategy, a development strategy for the Syria crisis. So it's regional, and that's our first, I think, contribution, or attempt to contribute to make it more durable, is to have a regional approach in both a humanitarian development to help support displaced communities in Syria, as well as Syrian refugees in the neighboring countries and their host communities. Secondly, we're trying to focus more, to shift more towards resilience and moving towards the nexus that everybody is talking about between humanitarian support and long-term development. I think we also have to recognize this in itself is difficult. There is a balance here where we do not want to support or appear to support, and we don't want to be in support of the Syrian regime. And at the same time, we need to push ourselves towards contributions that are more resilient and more long-term. Mental health issues were mentioned. I think that's an excellent example. I think that there are other examples on more practical level, moving from water trucks to basic infrastructure on water supply. So we have just prolonged our strategy and also increased it by 30%. And thirdly, resettlement, which has also been mentioned before by others. This is, of course, a very integral part of supporting a durable solution. We co-share the UNHCR Priority Solutions Core Group to promote global increase in resettlements from the priority situation, UNHCR priority situations. And nationally, we also maintain our commitment to providing 5,000 resettlement places annually. I agree with you, Birgitte. It's not a number that brings solution, but it's still comparatively an ambitious number.
I'm going to have to stop you here, and maybe we will take the rest of your comments throughout the panel. Thank you very, very much for your interventions. I would like to move now to Mrs. Huda Atasi and ask you, Huda, what is the situation like in Syria now? Can we practically talk about implementing durable solutions inside Syria now? If Johannes can shift the camera off and Huda, your camera on, please. Huda will be speaking in Arabic, but you can all hear the interpretation through the link at the bottom of the screen.
شكرا ربا، شكرا للجميع. حقيقة في ظل انعدام ثقة بالنظام السوري وممارساته الإجرامية ضد شعبه من قتل واعتقال واضطهاد وخدمة عسكرية وإجبارية وتفشي الفساد الذي هو واحد من أهم أسباب التدهور الاقتصادي الحالي في سوريا، فقد باتت العودة الآمنة والطوعية والكريمة خياراً لا يمكن تطبيقه أو العمل عليه طالما النظام السوري وأجهزته الأمنية باقية. وهذا الخيار لا يمكن تطبيقه من مناطق اللجوء وأيضاً من مناطق النزوح الداخلي في سوريا. لذا يجب علينا أن نفكر بحلول عملية ودائمة تضمن حياة مقبولة للسوريين من لاجئين ونازحين أيضاً. ولكن الأوضاع في سوريا لا يمكن أن تطبق فيها حلول من نوع واحد وعلى كامل الخريطة السورية. فالوضع في سوريا يقسم إلى 3 مناطق. المناطق التابعة للحكومة السورية والتي هي وسط وجنوب سوريا، ومناطق شمال شرق ومناطق شمال الغرب. المناطق التي تحت سيطرة الحكومة السورية والتي لا تسمح بدخول الكثير من المنظمات الإنسانية الدولية العاملة بالشأن السوري لتقديم المساعدات المطلوبة للسوريين هناك، فهو كما واضح للجميع حتى وكالات الأمم المتحدة العاملة من دمشق لا تملك الحرية الكاملة في تنفيذ برامجها وتواجه الكثير من المعوقات، وهذا ما تؤكده لنا العديد من المنظمات العاملة هناك. فهذا المؤشر يعطينا توجه إلى المناطق الأخرى كشمال شرق سوريا وشمال غرب، ووضع حلول مستدامة للمجتمع المدني السوري هناك وآلية تنفيذ هذه الحلول، وذلك من خلال: أولاً، دعم المنظمات التنموية وتخصيص ميزانيات للمشاريع المستدامة التي تخدم البنية التحتية من مياه وإصحاح وجمع نفايات وتدويرها وإصلاح الأراضي الزراعية وتنمية الثروة الحيوانية ودعم القطاع الطبي والاستشفائي. ترميم المدارس التي ما زال جزءاً كبيراً منها مدمراً لغاية اليوم بسبب القصف، وتخصيص ميزانيات ضخمة للتعليم الأساسي والتعليم المهني للشباب واليافعين. دعم مشاريع تمكين المرأة من الناحية التعليمية والمهنية وأيضاً التوعوية مثل التوعية السياسية والتوعية القانونية. دعم المؤسسات المدنية والحقوقية التي تساهم في نشر الوعي المجتمعي المدني والسياسي والحقوقي للوصول إلى تعايش سلمي فيما بينها، والمساهمة بالاندماج المجتمعي بين مكونات المجتمع المختلفة هناك. بهذه الآليات المذكورة يتشكل لدينا مجتمع متجانس منضبط خال من التفرقة والعنصرية والعصبية، يملك الأدوات التي تمكنه من بناء مجتمع متعلم ومتمكن لديه القدرة على بناء مجتمعه والحفاظ على مكتسباته ومنتجاته الاقتصادية والتعليمية، وأيضاً الحفاظ على أمنه واستقراره وتدفعه لعدم التفكير بالهجرة إلى دول أخرى. شكراً.
Thank you very much, Huda, for these important points. I will come back to you with a follow-up question. But if I can ask Gillian at the moment the following question: how do you think we can accelerate the practical implementation of durable solutions now in the region, inclusive of regional actors and regional civil society? And what are some of the practical steps to apply with a more resilience lens to the funding political decisions, including increase in resettlement? Gillian?
Well, thank you very much, Ruba, and thank you to the Norwegian Refugee Council and the governments of the Netherlands and Sweden for this event. I've had the opportunity to hear some of the earlier discussion in the panel and, of course, to hear Johannes and Huda's remarks. So it's very gratifying from the point of view of the UN Refugee Agency to hear you using the international legal standards that underpin, of course, the work that we engage in. We are here to discuss, and Ruba's question is about practical implementation to find durable solutions. And perhaps in seeking those solutions, which of course is a primary objective for the UN Refugee Agency, we do stress, as others have done, that we must listen to the voices of refugee families, of men, women, of the children, who, by the way, comprise more than 50% of those that we seek to protect. So it's their future that we are concerned with, and we need to listen to them clearly and engage them in any discussion about what the solutions are. And it's with that in mind that I'm very pleased to say that we are just about to launch our 6th regional return perception and intention survey, which covers Syrian refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. The key point, of course, is that these intention surveys provide us with some factual information that can help underpin our policies to achieve the practical implementation that Ruba has asked about. The findings are pretty much the same as other years, and that is that about 70% of those engaged in the survey want to return to Syria. This is very common, but only 2.4% have any sense that they will be returning shortly. So there's a big gap between what the intention is and what they know they can actually achieve in practice. They describe the challenges that influence their decision making. They are lack of security, failure to respect their basic civil and human rights, questions as to whether their homes have been destroyed, whether their children can go to school, and whether they can find work. So UNHCR has been advocating and implementing a comprehensive protection solutions approach in a regional refugee and resilience plan. And we've been doing this for a number of years. And we have three central ideas: supporting host countries and the communities that have been so generous for so long, for 10 years as we enter the 11th, but also ensuring the protection and dignity of refugees and all others who need that protection. Also advocacy to expand resettlement, and that's been discussed, and perhaps we'll come back to that in a minute, along with complementary pathways, which I do suggest we talk about in a little bit more detail, labour mobility, education, family reunion, community sponsorship. But finally, enhancing the preparation and support for those who choose voluntarily to return. So there are four elements that I'd like very briefly to mention. One is we need to think about a new package to enhance support for host countries. The reality is that that many Syrians will be staying in these countries for the rest of their lives or for a significant period of time. They need civil documentation, they need access to health, education and employment, and we need to assist those host countries with the impacts of the pandemic. The resettlement programs, secondly, need to be significantly expanded. Actual resettlement rates at the moment for Syrians are under 4%. We need a very significant effort to increase resettlement. It's not a total solution, as has been said earlier, but it's an important solution, and it's one that provides hope for so many people. The third point is that we have basic principles at UNHCR, as you're all well aware. There is a legal right to seek and to enjoy asylum for persecution. There is a right to return, but at the same time, there can be no forced return to areas that are not safe. And so in UNHCR, we are trying to support those who would like to return by giving them information, by counselling them so that they have accurate information for their returns. And finally, and the last point I'd like to make, if I may, is that we need to together to address the many barriers that stand in the way of returns voluntarily by, as I've said, the overwhelming majority of Syrians who would very much prefer to return home in a safe environment in which they can find that durable solution that we're all talking about. Thank you very much, Ruba.
Very rich intervention. I would like to remind everyone that you can ask questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom. But Gillian, if I may just pick up on one point and look at one of the questions that came in the chat from a Syrian mother in Lebanon. She's saying many Syrian children do not have any documents proving their existence except for the national papers, a nation's paper, including my child. Is there a plan to enhance documentation for refugees in neighboring countries?
Well, thank you very much, Ruba, and thank you for the question. That is absolutely fundamental, and of course, it's a technical aspect, documentation, but it's fundamentally important. And UNHCR is working very hard in all of the countries hosting Syrian refugees to ensure that, firstly, children's births are registered. That's point number one. Number two is that, of course, so many fled without documentation, and they now need that documentation. It's an absolutely vital element to achieving any form of dignity and access to basic services. So that is a key element of what we're doing. Thank you, Ruba.
I will move now to Mr. Jan Eland, and I would like to ask you, more practically speaking, from your perspective at NRC, what is needed from donors to support displaced Syrians in Syria and facilitate your work as international organizations and our work as local civil society organizations?
Thanks a lot, Ruba, for your chairing of us, and thanks to the Netherlands, to Sweden, and to our humanitarian partners that helped organize this important event. Listen, it's been 10 long, horrific years. I think that really needs to sink in now as we're trying to influence the Brussels conference with all of these member states. It cannot continue like this in another 10 years. cannot. So I think the starting point is that donors that I'm addressing, but all others, they need to work differently. I've been working on Syria now every single month since 2011 in many capacities, especially from the humanitarian capacity. And what worries me is the stalemate. There is a complete stalemate at the moment, and that's not a neutral scenario. Oh, it could go worse, it could go better, it's a stalemate, so maybe it's neutral. The stalemate is really very bad. The child who fled at 11 in 2012 is now 20. In 30, 31 will be 30. Shatila camp in Lebanon, the original refugees are now, who came as babies in 48, 49, are now 72. Their great-grandchildren are born into Shatila camp. So it has to change. Now, what should the donors do? Well, number one, influence more the parties on the ground. Influence the sponsors of the partners. I mean, talk to the government in Damascus, talk to the armed opposition groups and those who can influence them, talk with Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and get the message across that there is no durable solutions at the moment. There is keeping people alive from one year to the next. And it's really too bad for the children who fled in 2011 and 2012. They lost their childhood. They shouldn't lose their youth and their most productive years. So talk to them, and then, of course, push for changes on the ground. I would say that we who are Syrian and international humanitarian actors on the ground, and NRC is on all sides. We've been on all sides throughout the conflict. It's too difficult for us to work, really. We cannot really facilitate durable solutions. The government doesn't allow us to do housing, land, and property work, to do legal work. We do not get permission to do a lot of the project that was supposed to. We also have problems with the armed opposition groups. We have problems with the de facto authorities. And then the donors say, which I find incredible, no, we will not reconstruct school for these poor children unless there is a constitutional solution and the government and the change of government. We're not saying that elsewhere. We're saying that children should get reconstructed, the school, the clinic, the electricity, the water, etc., because they need it. It's the whole humanitarian principle of impartiality. We address their needs. So my point is, can we now from this conference onwards say, next 10 years need to be different, there need to be real solutions, and the donors need to proactively change the stalemate and the status quo.
Yeah, and let me ask you a follow-up question. You are talking about a stalemate politically and from a donor international community perspective. Some people think it's also a stalemate in terms of conflict, meaning that the conflict is declining. But there is a prediction of 6 million more displacement in the next phase of the conflict. Why is there such a prediction? The war over.
Well, I mean, the conflict is in some sort of stalemate because some of the front lines are frozen. But in Idlib, there's still bombing, there's still violence, people are still being displaced in Syria every single week by blunt violence. So that's one of the reasons that we fear millions of more displacement in the next 10 years. Many think, oh, the war was something in the past, and now we need to have very lengthy political negotiations that are going nowhere, by the way. What we say is violence is still displacing people big time in many places, and especially in the Northwest. Secondly, more and more people are being displaced by the economic destitution. The economy in Syria is in a free fall at the moment. It was a middle-income country. I mean, you know, it was a place with a very, not a very, pretty strong economy, really, middle-class life for very many people. So that sustained people for some time. At the moment, there isn't really any buying power even for food. So many now are displaced because of the economic destitution. And we predict millions of more displacement if there is not a change to the better.
Thank you, Jan. I would like to go back to our Swedish speaker and ask, how can we increase the funding commitments from the donor, and how can we make those commitments even more efficient in terms of programming? Johannes, how can we increase these funding commitments, and how can we make the programs from donor states more productive and efficient?
Thank you. I'm afraid that, I mean, fundamentally on a global level, we are entering a time where increased financial commitments might be even more difficult than they've been historically. We are, I think most donors are supporting the Syria crisis through budgets that are now under pressure from a global pandemic that also raises needs in other ends. That's an observation. It's not a solution. We have, as I said, decided to increase our Syria crisis strategy by about 30%. Again, you know, that's a contribution. It's not a solution. But I think that, you know, that it's a combination of keeping attention and also, of course, and that brings me to the second part of your question. I think to try and look for more durable solutions that are also, you know, more efficient economically. I recognize what you say, Jan, on you know, a humanitarian imperative or to move for, as I understand you, to move further on more durable solutions. We do make that recognition in our new strategy. You know, at the same time, and I know that you are fully aware, it's not easy. It's not an unpolitical situation. So of course there are limitations to what would be normal development work. That's a fact. But we can move further in that direction, and that would be more cost efficient as well.
Thank you very, very much, Johannes. I would like to go to Huda and ask her, from a civil society perspective, from a Syrian civil society perspective, can we accelerate the implementation of such commitments, and can we make sure that they are more inclusive and more centered around what Syrian civil society wants and sees as needs on the ground every day?
ربا أنا أود أن أشكر السيد جان على مداخلته والتي أفاد فيها أن نقطة البداية هي من الجهات المانحة وهذه حقيقة. المجتمع السوري حقيقة لديه احتياجات كثيرة، ونحن الآن نتحدث عن الحلول المستدامة. يعني لا نستطيع أن نتحدث عن حدود المستدامة وما يزال النظام السوري يقصف لغاية اليوم المناطق بما بين قوسين المناطق المسيطر عليها من المعارضة. يعني البارحة كان هناك قصف للأتارب، تم استشهاد 6 قصف مدفعي، 6 شهداء في هذا المشفى، منهم أطفال ونساء وبعض الكوادر الطبية. فنحن نتحدث عن حدود مستدامة لتمكين المجتمع من الناحية التعليمية ومن الناحية الطبية، ولغاية اليوم ما زلنا نفقد هذه البنى التحتية بمناطق شمال شرق وشمال غرب. حقيقة مشاركة المجتمع المدني بالتخصيص لحلول مستدامة لهذه المناطق يبدأ من المشاورات مع المجتمع المدني ومع العاملين الإنسانيين على الأرض لتحديد ما هي الضرورات الاحتياجات المطلوبة لهذا المجتمع. وكما تحدثنا سابقا أن التعليم والصحة هي من أهم الاحتياجات المطلوبة لهذه المناطق، بالإضافة إلى مشاريع التنموية. يعني نحن ما نزلنا لغاية اليوم نجد أن منظمة WFP توزع آلاف السلل الغذائية، وأنا حقيقة أستغرب كعاملة إنسانية بهذا المجال لماذا ما تزال توزع السلل الغذائية إلى داخل سوريا. نحن بحاجة لمشاريع تنموية. هذه الملايين، عشرات الملايين التي توزع وتباع في الأسواق، نحن بحاجة لمشاريع تنموية لننمي هذا المجتمع. تنمية المجتمع تكون كما أشارت زميلتنا من Save the Children، الأطفال بحاجة إلى تعليم. من خرج من سوريا عمره 10 سنوات الآن عمره 20 سنة، قد لا يكون أتاحت له الفرصة للدخول إلى المدارس، يلزمه مدارس للتعليم المهني لكي يتعلم حرفة ومهنة يقوم بالعمل عليها. فنحن بحاجة للتعليم. هذا التعليم إن كان مهني أو تعليم أساس الأطفال هو من يبني هذا المجتمع. ونلاحظ بالتخصيص إن كان تخصيص الأوتشا أو المنظمات الدولية أقل ميزانيات تعطى للتعليم. ونحن كمنظمات مجتمع مدني نوجه الصوت لكل المانحين الرجاء أن يزيدوا من ميزانيات التعليم. فالتعليم إن كان الأساسي أو المهني هو من سيبني هذه المجتمعات، وهو من ستكون فيها تنمية مستدامة تفسح المجال لكل أطياف المجتمع بفرص العمل، بالتعلم، بالتنور، بعدم التطرف، ببناء مجتمعهم بشكل سليم. العلم هو من يبني المجتمعات وليس شيء آخر. شكرا.
Thank you very, very much, Huda. We have actually a flowing of questions in the Q&A section, but unfortunately, we have to move on to our third section. There will be dedicated individuals representing our speakers who will be responding via the chat to the questions that have been asked. As for now, we need to move on to the last section of our discussion today. But before that, let me just quickly try and recap. It's impossible to recap all the rich inputs that we've received throughout the last 1 hour and 10 minutes so far. But I mean, a quick recap, I would say all of our speakers focused on the need to end the conflict and for a peace process in order to have really efficient, durable solutions. We need to put the end to the stalemate that we are seeing and ask neighboring governments and neighboring countries to better collaborate to ensure that these durable solutions are being enforced. A lot of our speakers spoke about increases in numbers of resettlement. There has been also mentioning of the mechanisms of dialogue that need to be available between the refugees and the host communities to ensure better integration. There was a stress on the mental health and psychosocial support, as mentioned by Rasha, but also by other speakers, as a very important way to integrate the refugees wherever they are. The situation in Syria has been mentioned as a very dire situation. The violence needs to end in order for us to be able to speak about good conditions inside the country. But as we stand, all of our speakers mentioned that the conditions as we stand are not in place for a dignified, voluntary, and sustainable return. We need to see higher degrees of solidarity and more equitable distribution of funds, especially also when we talk now with the COVID situation, more equitable and just distribution of money that is in relation to vaccines. And we need the international community to better fund these vaccines. Solutions for durable solutions need to be more regional in their approaches and more holistic. And we need to look at not only humanitarian support or long-term development in silos, but also look at it as, a collective or a holistic approach in our interventions, and do different and more tailored interventions for different areas of Syria. The rehabilitation of schools has been mentioned as one of the main barriers towards return, but also we need to give refugees better information on the situation inside Syria, on the situation of schools, of work, of homes, and this can be done through a continuous monitoring. In terms of advocacy, we need to increase our advocacy and raise our voices about the better resettlement, about more funding and better and more efficient funding for durable solutions, as well as a more central play, a central role for Syrian civil society and Syrians themselves in order to design more participatory approaches for durable solutions. I can go on and on, but I think I will stop here. This is some of the things that came up in topics. But now let me welcome with us Mr. Michael Miller, who is the head of the Middle East unit at DG NEAR at the European Commission. I'm very happy to have you with us, Michael, and thank you for attending this panel. I know it's very busy now at DG NEAR, preparing for the Brussels conference. Listening to all our speakers, what can you tell those who are attending the panel today about the EU response to the Syrian crisis? Can you briefly describe how has it been and what is the ongoing programming of the EU response for the forthcoming years?
Thank you, Ruba. It's very nice to see you again, even under these very depressing circumstances and a difficult conversation we're having this afternoon. I wanted to start by thanking the Netherlands and Sweden and the NRC for making, reaching out to me and organising the panel. I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity. It's a week before the conference is taking place. It's a good moment for us to exchange with you and Syrian civil society representatives also via the chat. So all of that is very positive. Now you ask about the EU response. What I wanted to say was that certainly it is true. Jan is criticising donors for the lack of durable solutions. What I wanted to say immediately in response is that durable solutions, sustainable outcomes are absolutely front and centre of what the European Union wants to see happening in response to the Syrian crisis in Syria, in the neighbouring countries hosting Syrian refugees as well. Now we have to ask ourselves, despite the phenomenal amount of European financing that has been made available to cope with the impact of the crisis, and we are currently at a level of 24.9 billion euros since the start of the conflict in 2011. So despite that phenomenal amount of money, how is it possible that we have not yet reached durable solutions for the majority of refugees and displaced? And we should be honest with ourselves, we have not managed to create durable solutions for the majority of those who have been affected by the conflict. I mean, first and foremost, I don't want to repeat so much what Brigitte said, but we don't see willingness from Damascus to engage with a political solution. We don't see meaningful engagement in the work on a new constitution, regrettably. And we are, of course, very active in supporting the UN Special Envoy and his team in trying to bring that about, also supporting the capacity of the Syrian opposition to engage in those talks. We see that there is a marked absence of the conditions for safe and dignified return, regrettably, to Syria. So we don't see public services, we don't see security. What we see is the screening by Damascus of those who wish to return for political loyalty. This is not conducive to durable returns. I have to say, furthermore, that the economic challenges, of course, that the neighbouring refugee hosting countries are experiencing are very significant when we talk about the potential for creating livelihoods or economic opportunities, access to basic services in those countries where the refugees currently reside. A further challenge, finally, we know that there is limited potential for resettlement. We know this is a challenge. Partly this is due to the scale of the needs, but I would draw attention to the fact that the member states of the European Union are currently providing protection and shelter to 750,000 refugees from Syria. So it is not negligible. There's a lot happening. Now, I mean, if I can continue, and I know we're short of time, politically, of course, This is the 5th Brussels conference. We're organising it together with the UN. That in itself is an indication of the level of our commitment to trying to find a durable political solution to the conflict. I spoke already about the nearly 25 billion euros since 2011. What I wanted to say here is that in terms of durability, what you've seen in the past 10 years has a conscious shift away from crisis response, away from a primary focus on humanitarian funding towards funding which is more for resilience. It's more about access to education, opportunity, livelihoods. It's about access to services, job creation, and so on. This shift has been done very consciously to give ourselves a bit of space to increase sustainability, to try to maximize the durability of what we're trying to do on the ground. This has been manifest in an effort to reinforce national systems for service delivery rather than creating parallel systems. It's obvious for me in the way that we're doing an awful lot of work to reach out to Syrian civil society, but also the most vulnerable parts of the communities hosting refugees from Syria. We're trying to avoid tensions on the ground by ensuring that the most vulnerable, whether they are hosts or refugees, are able to access basic services. Now, we've done this, I have to say, by creating two very novel mechanisms. The first is a facility for refugees in Turkey. The second is the Madad Trust Fund in response to the Syrian crisis. What this has done is it's allowed us to maximize the way in which we are able to mobilize funding, the way in which we are able to team up with our member states, and the way in which we are able to deploy financial resources on the ground to the benefit of those most in need. This has been very successful. Last year alone, the Madad Trust Fund disbursed, not committed, but disbursed €500 million in financing. So these are very effective. Mechanisms we have set up. This year is a transition. Ruba, you're aware of it. We're transitioning towards a new instrument for channeling assistance to deal with the Syrian crisis, away from the trust fund and away from the facility for refugees in Turkey. What I would say is that the focus for us now is very much, first of all, in the region. It's on trying to help the economies of the region, the countries of the region, to reboot their economies from the disruption, the fragmentation of the Syrian crisis, and also the very, very negative impact of COVID-19, which we've all seen. So there is a very conscious effort. We have set out just last month an economic and investment plan, which is intended to help the refugee hosting countries, amongst others, cope with the burden, so generating wealth so they can continue to host the refugees. And inside Syria, if I can say 2 words on inside Syria, we don't work with the regime. We haven't since 2011. We don't find that they are the right interlocutor for us. What we do is, though, we have remained present with development financing inside Syria, in opposition-held Syria and in regime-held Syria. The point here is to show solidarity with those Syrians who, through no fault of their own, end up having their lives disrupted, whether they are displaced inside Syria or not. They still need access to services. We, as the international community, still have an interest in stabilizing Syria over the foreseeable future. We need stability. We need basic services to be provided. And what I wanted to say, I know you want to interrupt me, but the last thing I want to say is that conditions are not there for return. We regret that. We think that is a choice of Damascus. Nevertheless, there are some voluntary returns taking place into Syria, and we, as the European Union, are piloting an effort to try to avoid that those returns, which are voluntary, that those returns are destabilizing. What we want to do is pilot an effort to make sure that when there is a voluntary decision to return, even under current circumstances, that those returns, those who do choose to return, are able to have access to basic services so that there is no further displacement. I think the last thing we need is for returnees to go back to Syria, find they have no jobs, no security, no education, and no housing, and therefore leave again. That is something we need to bring an end to. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your reassurances about the red lines, but also being open towards more pragmatic approaches all at the same time. Johannes, I will give you 1 or 2 minutes if you have any final concluding thoughts. Sorry, it was meant to be 2 to 3 minutes, but it's been such a rich discussion.
Well, very shortly then, just to say thank you very much. I think it's been an enriching discussion, very good. Seems clear to me that there are elements of where we agree. I mean, on needs-based, sustainable, and regional approach, and focus on resilience and moving. I mean, I think Michael put it well, that there's the need. There are red lines, and there's the need to be pragmatic at the same time. And this is the balance. We need to push ourselves there, and I think that's a very interesting discussion, Jan, and very much needed. And it's helpful that we're having that as we're moving into the conference next week. Thank you.
Thank you. There are so many questions in the panel in the Q&A section. I urge panelists, if you want to go ahead and answers so that we don't leave these questions unanswered. We have only 7 minutes left, and I would like to leave this panel giving the final word, as usual, for the Syrians whose lives actually we are discussing once again in the sidelines of the Brussels conference. We have with us Saad from the Bunyan organization, who's also part of the Voices for the Syrian Displaced. Saad, as a Syrian civil society organization and activist, what are some of the changes you want to see coming out of the conference when it comes to durable solutions? You have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Ruba, for the opportunity. I would like also to thank Sweden, Netherlands, and NRC for organizing the side event. I think in 1.5 minutes, I would like to stress on what other colleagues have been mentioning about Syria is not safe in Damascus. It's not safe in anywhere. And if we need to discuss return, we need also to discuss safe, voluntarily and dignified return only. We cannot accept, there's no exceptions to that. When we discuss durable solutions is not a standalone activity. It is a lenses that we need to see in all type of policies, that including humanitarian assistance programs, development programs, social cohesion, and immigration policies. I would like also to stress what Mr. Johannes has mentioned about the triple nexus, the humanitarian, development, and peace nexus. One other thing on the policymakers is to increase investment in the local actors and increase the localization and the grand bargain commitment. The local actors in Syria and the Syrian-led organizations are the best, let's say, the best entity that can include, that can implement and design programs, right to the solutions, right to the each specific areas. There's no one size fits all solutions in Syria. The grassroots are always coming with innovative solutions. They almost done it with very low cost. So increasing the localization, the consultation with the Syrian society, with the youth, and with the women inside and outside Syria is essential, that we would like to see more and more. Thank you very much.
Oh, Saad, you managed to put a lot into these 1.5 minutes. So thank you very much for these concluding remarks. I would like to maybe leave on a slightly hopeful note. So, I mean, Rasha, can you come back and tell us, as an 18-year-old Syrian who has gone through a very long journey of displacement and redisplacement, what are some of your after hearing all of the speakers? What are some of your aspirations in the next 10 years? How can everyone present here today, all the stakeholders, help you to achieve these aspirations?
Hi, thanks for having me again. I think that in general, my biggest hopes for Syria is it becoming a strong, non-corrupted democracy with a diverse political system and laws that ensure the safety and freedom of the citizens before it ensures that of politicians and people with power. Also, I hope that one day Syria will go from its position right now and become a more developed country with equal chances for everyone living there, no matter your status or wealth. I think once that's reached, my hopes in life would be to go back there, if not to live there permanently, at least to help build up the country again. My wish in life is obviously, after going to university, is doing something and helping my country become better than what it is right now and what it has been, and reach its highest point. And I hope that everyone understands that instead of us tolerating refugees more and letting refugees saying, yeah, we tolerate refugees, we tolerate Syrians. We should think more about acceptance and about making sure we give them the chances that they deserve to be able to go back and build their lives again.
Thank you very, very much, Rasha. Very, emotional remarks and aspirations. I hope we will all be up to your, up to your expectation and support you and, all of the Syrians to achieve what they look for. I would like to ask again Sweden and the Netherlands for, hosting this along with all the multiple INGOs that have put so much effort. Thank you, Kathleen and Samah, and thank you for the great interpreters, Noor Kalaji and Ala Abu Sharif, who have been translating, voluntarily in this event. Thank you all for your participation. Thanks for the attendees who have given us your time. And I'm really sorry we were not able to answer all your Q&As, but hopefully this will ignite further discussion, going up to the next Brussels conference and towards a commitment from all of us to ensure better and dignified, more just lives and the rights of Syrians, whether inside Syria, in the region, or in the places where they are resettling. And hopefully one day we can come and talk about a more better environment for us to be talking about dignified, voluntary, and sustainable returns. Thanks all again, and have a wonderful afternoon, and best of luck in the coming days and in the Brussels conference. Thank you.
Thank you.